This meeting to order. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the meeting will be held by Zoom video conference for participants. Viewers will be able to watch the meeting live on YouTube. The YouTube channel is North Little Rock School District Board Meetings. And I will hand this over to Dr. Paluski.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, President Temple, Vice President Redis, members of our Board of Education. Very excited tonight. We have three very informative presentations. So we're going to start off with our first presentation, which is bond refinancing. And that will be given by Mr. Scott Beardsley, who is our financial advisor, our financial guru. He will also be presenting with Mr. Brian Brown, and he has a lot of great information that he's going to share as it relates to an action item at our next, our regular board meeting in 2 weeks. So without further ado, I introduce to you Mr. Scott Beardsley and Mr. Brian Brown.
Good evening, board. It is great to be back with you again. JT, great to see you back on the board and looking forward to working with you. As many of you know, for the last several years, we have been waiting until 2020 when we knew that we had the possibility of restructuring the bonds approved at the previous election. And as interest rates have gone down, we've continued to monitor that. I think we've talked about it at several board workshops, and the balance was the board ready to go back to the voters and ask for an extension of the existing millage. Since the last time we have visited, rates have continued to trend down. And so I would like to give the board an update on both that refunding an option, and something that may be more attractive to the board is an option that we can take advantage of while interest rates are low that does not involve going back to the voters. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up a couple of PowerPoints to walk you through that. And I'm gonna have to put on my glasses. So JT, since I can see you, would you wave if you see my first power slide? All right, thank you. What we'd like to go over tonight is interest rates are lower than when the district initially issued its debt back in 2013. And so the board really has three options we'd like you to consider. One is the new option of refinancing 3 of the 4 outstanding bond issues. The other option we'd like to review with you is updating the option to go to the voters that we have talked about previously. And then there's always the option to do nothing at this point and to continue to monitor the market. Refunding 3 of the bond issues that are currently callable means that we can either refund or refinance and lower the annual debt payment, because the current interest rates are lower than the bond rate. And I kind of use the terms refunding or refinancing interchangeably. And it's just like refinancing your house if you've been through that process. Because rates are lower, you take the amount of principal that's outstanding, you borrow again at a lower rate of interest, and that makes your payments go down. So when we talk about savings, that's really just the difference between what you're currently obligated to pay and what your new payments are going to be. For those of you who have been on the board for a longer period of time, I just want to remind you that there's been a change in state law, and those savings are now unrestricted, and they may be spent by the board however you direct. They may also be saved for future use. The process of refinancing or refunding a bond issue is started with a vote of the local school board and approval of the Commissioner of Education. It does not go to the full Board of Education, and it does not go before the voters. So the district currently has 4 bond issues outstanding, and we generally refer to bonds by the date that the debt was incurred. So you can see that there are 4 columns there, each with a date at the top. And so the large bond issue We would refer to it as the July 1st of 2013 bond issue. It was originally for $125 million. We have bolded in red the interest rate that the district is currently paying. And equivalent bonds for the same term as your bonds right now, we think we could get at approximately 2% as the new interest rate. So on the large bond issue, it's currently at 4.37. If the market stays approximately where it is, we think that we could replace that with a 2% interest rate. So obviously the difference between 4.37 and 2 on $104 million outstanding produces pretty significant savings. Because the 2012, 2013, and 2015 bonds were all approved by the voters at the same time, we can save some of the cost of issuance by rolling them into one refinancing rather than doing them individually. We will still prove to the Department of Education that each bond issue saves money on its own, but we will be able to save, like I said, some of the cost of issuance by rolling them into one bond issue. We're not going to talk about the November of 16 bond issue tonight. It's not currently callable. That will be something for the board's consideration later this year when it gets closer to the date that it could be restructured. So what we're talking about doing is if we took those 3 bond issues, rolled them into one new, and we were able to sell the bonds at 2%, how much money does that save the district? And it's approximately $35.4 million. You can see on the far right of the slide, hopefully all of our pictures aren't cutting that off on your screen, that for the 22 payment, which is the 21-22 school year, the debt payment would be approximately $8.9 million than the district is currently paying. We have pushed a lot of the savings to the first 3 years and then tried to hold the savings at $1 million a year for the next 10 years. And then I have no savings after the year 31. That's purposeful because probably in 7 to 10 years from now, the district will go back to the voters and ask them to extend the millage. And so any savings that occurs in the future after a restructuring would not really be experienced by the school district. So we've pushed those savings up into the next 10-year period because you're more likely to get to experience those. To give you a feel for how much interest rates impact this, we sold a similar issue last week, was sold in the market, and the rate was 1.8%. For every 10 basis points that the market goes up or down, it basically in round numbers affects you $2 million. So if you were to get the 1.8%, if the market stayed where it was last week till we were out in the market in February, you would save an additional $4 million. If on the other hand, interest rates start to go up, for every 10 basis points that the market goes up, we will have $2 million less in savings. Would you like me to pause here for questions, or do you want me to cover the rest of the slides?
You can continue with the presentation.
All right, thank you, Ms. Temple. One of the things that we have talked to the board and worked with the administration on is what's the correct balance of spending these proceeds. The district has 2 different types of needs. One is you have the need for funds for construction, and one is you have the need for operational savings. And Mr. Brown has talked in several of the workshops about trying to reduce the debt payment by $1 million a year, and that $1 million could be redirected to operations. So the structure that we have for you tonight divides these $35 million worth of savings into 2 pots of money. $1 million per year for each of the next 10 years would be redirected for operational expenditures. $25.4 million would be saved over the next 4 years, and would be available for construction projects at the board's direction. So that's the current balance that we've struck between savings for operations and savings for projects. The interesting thing about this is when we have talked about this in 2019 and 2020, we had talked about trying to generate $20 to $25 million for projects and $1 million a year for savings. But in order to achieve that, we were going to have to go back to the voters and ask them to extend the millage. Because rates have dropped so low, we're able to get almost the same amount of benefit for the school district without asking the voters to extend the millage. And so that's part of the reason, in working with the administration, we wanted to update the board tonight that this is kind of a great opportunity that the district can take advantage of due to low interest rates. But in order to help you evaluate this refunding, we did want to give you option 2, is if the board wanted to go back to the voters, what does that look like? What additional benefit do you get if you want to ask the voters to extend the millage? Sorry, forgot I had one more slide in there. The timeline for refunding the bonds would be, if the board takes this up for consideration at your regular January board meeting, you would approve a bond application to go to the Commissioner of Education, and you would authorize the superintendent to accept or reject the bid. We would work during January to get the commissioner to sign off on the application. We would work with Mr. Brown to present the district's financials to Moody's Investor Services and have the bond issue rated. And we would expect to take bids the week of February the 15th. Again, the superintendent would be authorized to accept the bid on the board's behalf. And then at the February 25th regular school board meeting, the board would pass the final resolution, and those savings would begin to come into the school district in the 21-22 school year. All right, so now we are to updating the board on if you did want to go back to the voters. We would potentially ask the voters to extend the tax rate for 8 years. It currently pays off in 2043, and that would now be extended for a full 30 years to 2051. That would generate approximately $25 million for projects, which is similar to the refunding. But the advantage it has is it would lower the debt payments by $1.6 million a year for 14 years instead of 10. And actually, as one of the other bonds pays off, save the district even more money in year 15 and going forward. And so those are those additional savings after 2036. The district can call a special election if you chose to do that on the second Tuesday of any month prior to your regular annual election in November. You do have to give the voters 60 days notice by publishing a special election notice in the newspaper, or the district could wait until its annual school election in November. Kind of bringing those two things together, the district can generate approximately $25 to $26 million over the next 4 years for projects and lower the annual debt payment by that approximately $900,000 to $1 million a year. Just as a reminder, again, this is all interest rate sensitive. We won't be able to control where the market is when you're able to take bids in mid-February. So for every 10 basis points that the market moves up or down, it has approximately a $2 million impact on the benefit to the school district. Option 2 does generate more savings than option 1, but it does involve going back to the voters. As I mentioned earlier, today's lower interest rate environment produces approximately the same benefit as the previous election option the district has reviewed. I'll be glad to pause there and answer any questions that you have. And then the superintendent's recommendation is the last bullet point.
Madam President, can I ask a few questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Beardsley, thanks. As always, your information is wonderful. My first question is, well, it was going to be why it was front loaded the way it is, why the savings were front loaded. I understand that you did that because we potentially have an option to go back in a number of years to re-extend the millage and add some savings at that time. Because it's so front loaded, those first few years, are we basically just paying interest? Meaning we're not really paying the principal down at all?
Correct.
Okay. So the principal on it's going to remain flat for what, 3 years, and then the 4th year is where we really start paying that down.
Yes.
Okay. And I assume that costs us some as opposed to spreading the savings out across the full term.
Yes. This structure is, from a mathematical standpoint, the least efficient structure.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you took level savings over the life of the bond issue, it would produce more savings. But historically, the district has not left its debt outstanding more than 10 years at a time. And even though theoretically you would have more savings by spreading it over the next 20 plus years, it wouldn't do you any good, the savings that happen after the refunding. So we choose the more efficient structure because it will actually be, the district will realize those savings in the most likely scenarios.
Okay. Next question, if we were to extend the millage, I know you say in bullet point 3 that it generates more savings, but the overall that we will pay back when you add on the 8 years is higher. Is that not correct?
Correct, because you're going to borrow the money for 8 additional years. You're going to pay that interest.
That's okay. And then you broke it down with the $1 million a year and then savings for projects. Do we have to present that to the state when we go to them to refinance, or is this just for our reference to see?
That is totally at the district's control. So, and this board cannot bind future boards to follow the plan. The savings would be realized, and if a future board decided instead of in year 3 putting 4 million capital projects and wanted to spend that all on operations, that board in that year could make that decision. So while this would be the recommended structure to achieve the goals as we understand them, each year the board, when they approve the budget, would make the decision on how to spend the savings.
Okay. And my final question is, can we do these special elections anytime, or are there special years where we can do that to extend the millage? Are we limited on when we can do that?
The district can have 1 election per calendar year. Your normal election is in November. So you can have a special election any month prior to November on the 2nd Tuesday with 60 days notice.
Thank you very much.
Madam President,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, Mr. Beardsley.
Yes, ma'am.
First and foremost, I appreciate your report, but previously when you presented to us, I really like number 1. I said number 2, basically, I would hate to present a millage to our stakeholders during the pandemic, not knowing their circumstances at this time and maybe something in the future. But I do strongly support number 1, the refinance bond issues that we would do. And also, on number 2, I don't know if this was a run together sentence or anything, but it says request voter approval to extend the millage. And then you said, and with that, we'd have to refinance the bond issues also if that was done?
Yes, and so I'm always reluctant to have my spelling checked by a former teacher. So if I have a run-on sentence, I apologize. I was trying to convey the idea that there were 2 things that would need to happen. When the voters extended the millage, we would refinance the same bond issues as in option 1, and we would extend those payments out over a full 30 years. And by extending the payments over 30 years, it would lower the payment and allow us to have $25 million for projects but the payment be $1.6 million a year lower than you're currently paying.
Okay, I was just for clarity, Mr. Beardsley, you're good at what you do. But anyway, I really appreciate the number one, because during this pandemic, and we don't know if people can pay mortgages or anything, and just supporting our stakeholders. That's my attitude.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam President.
Any other questions? I have one quick question. Are we saying on your chart that as of June of this year, our outstanding debt will be 190 million? Is that 190, 630 million?
As of June 30th of 2021, after you make your February debt payment, the district will have outstanding 190,630,000.
And JT had asked you how much, well, he mentioned that there'd be additional expense to push the savings to the beginning. You don't have any idea how much we're talking about the expense of doing that, do you?
Rather than pull up a bunch of schedules on my screen, why don't I email that to the superintendent? Because I looked at 4 different structures to balance out getting the savings up front versus stretching them over. And I would be glad to send that to the superintendent to share with the board.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Beardsley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beardsley and Mr. Brown. And as we begin to kind of transition into our next presentation, I just want to give our community and our Board of Education some next steps. So at our regular board meeting, as Mr. Beardsley said, I'll be bringing forward the recommendation of option number 1 for the board's consideration and vote. And then what we're planning on at the first workshop in February is now to start having a presentation and a conversation on all of our capital projects, and to inform what are all the projects, and then to begin a conversation of starting to prioritize that. So that's kind of part of our next steps, because we know potentially we're going to have a $25 million savings in capital projects, and then we're going to have to start thinking about, as we all know, that there are many projects that are out there. So some next steps to come. Ms. Temple, would you like me to just go ahead and proceed to the next
Yes,
item number 2?
Yes, sir.
Great. So the next item or presentation that we're going to have is going to be by Mr. Brown. So one of the things that I've asked Mr. Brown to do is we've been collaborating is to put together the entire budget planning process. So the public as well as the board can understand what are the steps that have to take place beginning very shortly. And as we'll proceed through the FY22 budget process, and then Mr. Brown's going to share some minor tweaks or changes to our budget process for this coming FY22 cycle. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brown for his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Paluski, Madam President, member of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to present our budget process to you and just outline what that process looks like and the length of the process and what goes into preparing the budget. And I would like to just make one comment on the front-loaded savings in the schedule that Mr. Beardsley had prepared for you. That front-loaded savings in the schedule allows the district to obtain cash on hand. If we reduce our expenditures, it allows you to obtain that cash on hand up front, and that gives you a larger pot of money to deal with projects. So if we were to spread that out, you would have less cash on hand due to the savings to actually deal with those projects that want to fund with those. So that's one of the reasons that school districts front load that savings, is to get as much as you can up front, and that will help fund the projects over a shorter period of time. So I'll share my screen with you. I have provided you a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen. And so can you all see my screen? Okay, thank you. So what I want to do is just walk you through the budget process. And this will be a detailed walk through that process by month, but I would like to share with you the steps that we go through in preparing our budget. So the purpose of this presentation is just to go through and define the budget planning process, and then we're going to outline a few tweaks that we're planning to make as we work on fiscal year 22 budget. The time frame in our planning process, it begins in January, and that begins when you all approve the calendar for the ensuing year. So you will have calendar options that you'll be considering at your January meeting, and it's the gateway decision that allows us to begin our budget process. What we have to do is take the calendar that you all approve, and we have to set up what we call personnel budgeting. That's where we start budgeting staff for next year. But in order to do that, excuse me, we have to have our calendar in place so that in our system we can set up everyone's first day of their contract and their last day of contract, and the system helps us calculate calculate salary and benefits for everyone that's scheduled in the system. It ends on September 30th when we submit cycle 1 budget to ADE. And you all normally meet mid to late September to do that final approval of the budget so that we can submit that to ADE. And what I want to do is just, let's talk about what cycle 1 is. ADE collects a lot of data from school districts, and the way they collect that is through a reporting process, and they call those cycles. And ADE has established 9 cycles that we report data to them. And so I've got those outlined, and I've got some of the data. This is not all of it, but I wanted to give you just some information about what kind of data is being submitted in each of the cycles. So cycle 1 is the September cycle, and that's the big one for finance. That's the budget. And that happens, the window on that is September the 15th through the 30th. And I guess over the last few years, I've gotten questions from board members and from district employees that say, why are we submitting the budget for a fiscal year in September to ADE when our budget actually began July 1? And it's a great question, but I just want you to understand that is by design. The state does not allow us to submit a budget to them prior to September the 15th. September the 15th to September 30th is the window that ADE allows us to submit cycle 1. So that's our budget. And of course, bank reconciliation, they collect bank reconciliation every single month or every single cycle. They also collect student ID changes in that cycle. Cycle 2 is less finance and more student. So cycle 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, those are the cycles that involve mostly student data, but some financial data that is pulled from eFinance. So we've got teacher, student, safety, student ID changes, employee leave, all of those things are in cycle 2. That's where they collect our course codes, our teacher certifications, who's teaching in our district. In cycle 3, they collect student attendance, immunizations, bus data. We have to enter data on every bus that we have, the VIN number, those type of informations. On cycle 4, that's the big special education cycle. They collect other data, but these are just some of the big items. Cycle 5, again, is safety drill, student attendance, bank rec, employee leave, school board training hours that we are required to report to ADE. That's where we submit that, is in the month of February, and that's in cycle 5. Cycle 6, again, similar student data. Cycle 7, that's where all of our medical screening, all the screenings that our nurses do, that's collected at that time, as well as all of our student data for the year. So this is cycle 7 is in June. So they're collecting that current year, the year that just ended, all of the student data. They're also collecting your ALE data. And in cycle 8, that begins July. That is the finance time. So the big thing that they collect there will be salary and FTEs for different job classes. So they look at our teacher salary and they calculate our FTEs. They also calculate our average teacher salary. They also break that down to say, what is your average teacher salary that you pay out of operating? What's your average teacher salary that you collect, that you pay out of federal funds? Cycle 9 is when we do our final close on the book. So they collect all of our expense coding, all of our revenue coding, our fund balances, our net legal balance at that time. And that's when we do the final close. So we're closing a year in August and we're opening the year in September. So cycle 9 ends in August, cycle 1 opens in September. So that's sort of the process. And this is a little graphic that ADE has put out. This is their cycle 1, cycle 2, and this is a graphic that shows all of the cycle 9s here. So let's just talk about what's going to happen in January that's related to our budget planning. The board will approve the ensuing year calendar. So we've talked about that. That's the gateway item that allows us to open next year's personnel budgeting module in our software. So when you all approve the budget, we will come, whenever you all approve the calendar, we'll come in and open that personnel budgeting, and we'll set up calendars for all of our different job classes. We're also in January revising our current year financial forecast. So we're looking at what we had budgeted, what we have spent. We're looking at what is our projected ending balance. ADE revises federal funding allocations with carryover from the prior year. So ADE this month will be sending us our federal funding allocations with carryovers, and they'll make some adjustments throughout the year, but we'll be receiving that information and we adjust our budget accordingly. In February, we set our budget parameters, our office budget parameters, and we develop a calendar, how we're going to do things, who are we going to meet with, when we're going to meet with them. We continue the revision of our financial forecasts and projected ending balance. We create the calendars that I mentioned above. After the calendar is approved in January, we create our calendars for personnel budgeting module. And then in federal programs, they're going to have a mid-year review of their current budget with principals, and then they will also have an ensuing year budget projection with their principals as well. In March, we review student numbers staffing numbers, and enrollment projections for the next year with campus administration, and they work with HR on the staffing requirements that will be needed. Once we get our calendar set up for personnel budgeting, we actually open what we call personnel budgeting in eFinance. And that's just simply a module that allows us to import all of our personnel, and it allows us to apply the steps that they would earn on the salary schedules and calculate salary and fringe based on the salary schedule and new steps for the following year. We also begin preparations for employee contracts at that point, issuing employee contracts for the ensuing year. We have a current federal program funding that has to be spent by spring break. So schools are required to spend all of their federal program funding by spring break, and we cut that off at that point. And I'll show you why there are some requirements that have to be done in April and May for federal programs. We revised the current year financial forecast. We continue that revision. I have a worksheet that we work each month, and we are working on projecting that ending balance. We also develop at this point our principal, director, and coordinator budget schedule. So we have the principals and the directors and coordinators sign up for a day and time where they'll come meet with us and perform their budget meeting. And then tier 2, we have an annual financial training that's required by ADE. All administrators and school personnel that are in charge of funds are required to complete a tier 2 annual financial training, and we conduct that in the month of March and April. And you'll see it's the last line here in April. We set the budget meetings with principals and coordinators, and we carry those out. We also continue the preparation of employee contracts for the ensuing year. We continue budgeting for personnel in the ensuing year. We finalize our 3-quarter average student ADM projection. So in April, we will be able to look back on the current year, and we will be able to calculate our 3-quarter average student ADM. That drives our funding for the next fiscal year and drives our budget. We also revised the current year financial forecast, and we continue working on projecting our ending balance. And in May, we issue our employee contracts for the following year. We open our budget ledgers for purchase orders. So this is when, toward the end of the year, when we're getting into May, we're closing one year. But if principals or schools need to order items for the next school year, they can still do that. And that's when we open our budget ledgers to actually, so that schools can create a purchase order on the ensuing financial budget. We begin a budget closeout process. So May, that begins our marathon in finance. Federal Programs Audit Desk, they perform a desk audit, and they look, and that's Ms. Ratliff's area. She performs the audit and makes sure that all federal monitoring documentation that's required for federal programs is in place by the principals and coordinators that are that receive those federal funds to spend. We're still revising our current financial forecast and projecting that ending balance. In the month of May, we receive our preliminary assessment values from Pulaski County Assessor for the ensuing year. And so that's related to, tax books closing and assessment values being calculated, and that information comes from Pulaski County Assessor for the next year. We continue our Tier 2 annual training for administrators, and here is the reason that we require schools spend their federal funds by spring break. Is Ms. Ratliff is required to submit to ADE by May 1st her final budgets for federal programs. And once you submit the final budget May 1, it cannot be changed. So there's a 2-month reconciliation and adjustment time for us to make sure our budgets are accurate. And then she has to submit those by May 1. In June, we're actually performing our interim fiscal closeout. So we close the books to financial transactions. So we can't write any more checks. You can't perform a financial transaction. You can move things around on our books, and we have from June until August the 31st to make all the moves and tidy things up in our budget to submit to ADE. We continue that closeout process for the fiscal year. We have to perform all of our payroll processes for the fiscal year. So you all know that teachers have a contract. The contract, they start their pay, for the most part, teachers start their pay in August, and they get their pay in June. They get all of their pay in June. So we are required to perform those payrolls before we actually close the books in June. So all of the teacher payrolls begin in August. They have to all be performed before we close the books on June 30th. So we perform those in June and transmit the funds to the teachers for payment. We're also continue working on personnel budgeting. So as HR and the board approve new hires for the ensuing year, we enter those new people in our personnel budgeting. We take out the people who left or resigned. We enter their new salary, their new fringe, and that's part of our budgeting process. And then in June, we submitted May 1 our federal programs. In June, we're required to submit an application for the ensuing year federal program funds. In July, we actually officially opened the new fiscal year. We continue personnel budgeting work. We're working on cycle 8. That's the salary and FTE report. So after we have performed all of our payrolls in June and the payroll book is closed, we have to do a salary and FTE report that gets delivered to ADE, and that's in that cycle 8 list. Our rules and regulations training for administrators, that's performed by Ms. Ratliff and myself. She handles the federal programs training. I handle the operational budgets training. We do that with administrators during the summer. We also, as one thing that you are aware of as a board, we bring to you an annual resolution. And what we're doing is you all always approve a transfer of funds that exceed the 12.8 million in net legal fund balance over to the building fund balance. That happens in July. And this 12.8 is the net legal balance that I was talking about in our previous slides. So from January to June, we're actually doing calculations and projections, and we're trying to figure where we're going to end up, what our final ending balance will be. And our net legal balance that we operate under and have for the last 10 years is $12.8 million. We continue the work on budget prep. We get state aid notices the last day of July for the ensuing fiscal year. So we've actually opened our books on July 1, transactions happen, payroll happen, budget's not posted, and at the end of the month, the state releases their notice of how much funding we're going to get for each of the state fundings. In August, we're doing that final closeout. That's the cycle 9 that was on the list. And that closes out the prior year books. And we do that by August the 31st. That's also the trigger for audit to schedule to come out. They will schedule their audit visit after we notify them that we have performed our final close on August the 31st. We work on making sure that vacancies in personnel budgeting as new hires are filled, we take care of those. Principals receive federal funding budgets, and what they get is a projection, because we do not get actual numbers until later in the year. But Ms. Ratliff gets federal funding projections, and she gives those to the principals. We complete revenue budget and expenditure budgets and personnel budgeting for the ensuing year. And that allows us to open up our entire budget process in preparation for posting it in September. So in September, we're going to transfer all that planning that we do in the personnel budgeting module. All that planning that we do, adding people, taking away, putting in new hires, removing retirees, that will be posted as officially in budget in eFinance during September. We'll also review our budget for completeness. The superintendent will also review final budgets at that point. We'll present the budget to the board for approval, and then cycle 1, as you remember, the window for cycle 1 is September the 15th through the 30th. And then we post the budget in eFinance and to ADE in this window, September the 15th through the 30th. And that usually happens a day or two after the board makes final approval on that budget. So that's what we do to actually plan for the budget. And then the budget process continues, but then we transition from planning to actually monitoring. So in October, we're actually monitoring our budget expense. We're preparing for our audit of the prior year that we just closed. In November, our audit begins. Also, we start developing the next year calendars with LPPC, CPPC, and to bring to the board in December. And we start the revision of our current year budget process. So that's the current, and I know that's a lot, but I wanted to just go through the budget process, give you an overview of what's involved in making the budget. And we have a few tweaks that we are planning to implement for this year. I wanted to detail those for you. So later this month, January 20th through 22nd, Ms. Ratliff is going to do a mid-year federal programs budget review with all principals. And on the 28th, we are going to conduct a training for principals and our executive directors. And we're going to do some operational budget training, federal and categorical budget training with Ms. Ratliff. We're also going to do staffing evaluation training through HR, and that'll be a method of looking at your staffing based on your student enrollment. February the 1st through the 5th, we're going to have financial coaching sessions, and they'll be one-on-one with principals. So we're going to have a time with each principal where we can work with them, and we're going to work with them on increasing their knowledge of budget, giving them information regarding their budget, and allowing them to be involved in that budget planning process for their building. And then in March, we're going to have presentations by principals to the executive team for their building budgets. So we're going to use, the principals will use the training they get here and this one-on-one coaching session that they get here to prepare a presentation where they're going to prepare their budget and present their budget and their needs to an executive team. And I've got those listed. That the executive team will be here. And then after each presentation, the executive team is going to review those budget presentations, and we'll make decisions on school budget needs that the principals have presented, and the final approval of that, of course, will rest with the superintendent. So just in conclusion, prior to fiscal year 22, the budget planning and human resources, finance, and federal programs we've worked mostly independent with principals. So HR would have their meeting, finance would have our meeting, federal programs would have their meeting, and essentially work on those independently. Starting this year going forward, it will be more of a team effort. It'll be more of a coaching effort. It'll be principal led. Principals will help develop those budgets, their needs, and they will present it. They'll present their information to the executive team, and which will be evaluated for the ensuing year budgets. So that's information on the budgets. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have regarding the presentation.
Brown, that was very nice and thorough. Do we have any questions?
No question. I was just going to say the same thing. It was great information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Mr. Brown,
Yes, ma'am.
Madam President,
Yes, Ms. Williams?
okay, I hit the wrong key. What I was going to ask you, Mr. Brown, how effective will our budget be with, you trying to plan? What I really like here is, for once, we're having staffing and justification of when principals want to know about their buildings, and with the loss of our students, student loss, which Dr. Pawlowski previously stated that they're still working on this. But how will we be as a board effectively being able to work with the budget until we find out, the students, if they're coming back, what are we doing, so that we as a board, we can feel good and be positive about what we're doing, because we can't be going on hindsight, trying to think about what might happen when we actually need actual data for what we're trying to do. So how would that affect us really, Mr. Brown, and you're working with the budget? And by the way, very nice budget. And thank you, Dr. Pawlowski. First time I've been on the board 14 years and I never had anything like this.
You're welcome, Ms. Williams. It's our pleasure. You want to take that, Mr. Brown? We'll tag team that question.
Yes, we'll tag team that. That'll be fine. Yeah, Ms. Williams, that's a great question. Our student enrollment, as you know, drives the revenue that we receive from the state to operate our schools on. So as student enrollment increases, our revenue increases. As student enrollment decreases, our revenue decreases. And this is a conversation that I've been having with Dr. Pawlowski since he came on board from day one, regarding the need to look at, monitor our enrollment. And we've done some analysis on the student enrollment, and we have what you have to do is you have to look at where your enrollment is. You can't budget based on where you think your enrollment will be. You've got a budget based on where your enrollment is. So what we're doing is we're working on a method to be able to monitor our student ADM and to be able to project what we will need for the next school year. And that's part of the conversations and part of the coaching that I mentioned we're going to have with principals. We're going to look at their staffing. We're going to look at their student enrollment. And we've got to have those conversations about, if enrollment's declining, we've got to look at that with principals and let them see what impact that has on the budget.
Very good, Mr. Brown, because teachers, I know if there are no students, we don't want to lose any teachers, because anytime anybody, Mr. Brown, when you get ready to do cuts, you start from the top. You don't cut teachers, you go to administrators first. But I want to make sure that the teachers feel that they are safe during this pandemic. Everybody's kind of struggling, and we want them to feel comfortable to remain with our district, knowing that we're keeping up with our numbers and that they are still on board, sir. And thank you again for an excellent report.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Brown, I have one. It's not really budget, but while you were presenting, I was trying to remember what time frame is that 13th month when you're closing out the books. Is that July or is that August?
Both. So period one is July for school districts. So that's for period 1. June is period 12. Period 13 is the month of July and August. So 13 starts July 1 after the interim close and ends on our final close, which is August the 31st.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Kluski, back to you.
Yep, just want to kind of close a couple things out. And Mr. Brown, thank you for that. I thought that was, again, a great job. I do have, to your point there, Ms. Williams, I do have some serious concerns about our enrollment, not only just from the beginning of the year. Mr. Brown and I were looking at some data today. We're going to be unpacking that with our executive team. I've got a lot of questions as it relates to all of this surrounding enrollment. As it relates to the budget component, and I think that going forward, having a more collaborative approach with our central office administrators, with our principals, so that we can really start to get into the staffing, understanding allocations to schools and central office departments, and also justification. So we've just put in a vacancy review process where we're looking at every position that is vacant. We're trying to tie which funding source it's to, and then we want to hear from that hiring manager its justification. So what's the justification for the job, and if that position is not there, then what's the impact it has on that organization? So we'll be happy to share all of that as we go through. To give you a little snapshot about where we're going next on the budget process, at our next February budget or our February workshop, we'll start to begin with the board digging deeper into the budget process. So one of the things that Mr. Brown's going to start doing is we're going to start looking at budget to actuals by category over the last 5 years. So we can see as a board, so we can start to see as a board, what is our trend spending by category. So that'll be the first kind of high level. And then from there, we'll start digging into the budget more specifically into that particular category. So what are we spending that category on? What's the justification for that? And what is our trend spending will be for that category? So kind of stay tuned. I anticipate that February, March, and April will be having workshops specifically around understanding our budget, our category, and our trend spending. So we look forward to doing that with you. With that, I'm going to now turn it over, as Mr. Brown was talking about, part of this beginning process is beginning to look at the calendar for 21-22. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jacob Smith, our Executive Director of Human Resources, to share his presentation regarding a recommendation that we'll be making on a calendar choice for 2021. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Paluski, and members of the board. Thank you for having me this evening, and all other guests here present. I took a very proactive approach to the calendar this year, and I really wanted to make it a collaborative team effort. And the LPPC and CPPC were both very responsive in regards to this process. And I just wanted to lead with that because it was very collaborative, and there was a willingness to meet and get problems solved and issues worked out. And we just had a very good system this year that allowed us to provide some good feedback to develop calendars so that we could put it out to a vote. And we had a pretty overwhelming response in regards to the one that was picked. And so I'm going to share all of that with you right now in this presentation. So the purpose we have for the presentation today is to explain the processes and procedures around the school district calendar development and the input from that was given by all staff members. We also want to provide the results of the North Little Rock School District Calendar Survey for the calendar development. And then we want to present to you the school district calendar options and the recommendation of the 2021-2022 calendar by the superintendent. So a little background. So these are the policies on the licensed side of the house, policy 3.0, and on the classified side of the house, policy 8.33, that govern calendar development and recommendations. And so both bodies work together in what we call a calendar committee. And it's just made up of both the LPPC and the CPPC. We survey all the staff members on both sides of the house district-wide. And we develop different calendars based on the criteria and the information we receive. And then we bring those recommendations back to the superintendent so he can make a final recommendation to the board for your guys' approval. This year, we implemented a calendar survey. This is the first time, to my knowledge, this has been done. And what we did is we came up with kind of the high talking points of the different aspects that revolved around calendar development. And these are the 7 points we came up with. And we sent out a survey, and we allowed our staff to rank these different pieces by importance. And so parent-teacher conferences being held only after school, students attend the school day and teachers remain 2 days after school for 3 hours. Parent-teacher conferences held only during school, students are released, but teachers attend a single full day of parent-teacher conferences each term. And so this is that noon to 6 model that would allow for parents both during the day and after work to be able to come to parent-teacher conferences. Having a full 5-day Thanksgiving break, the first semester ending before winter break, a work day between the 2 semesters held the first day we returned from winter break. All PD held the week before school starts, professional development. A day off in April to break up the 50-day fourth quarter. And so with these in mind, we sent out our survey. And so the way this data is broken down is all 7 of those previous criteria are presented, and you have to give them a mark, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this correlates to each one of those ranks. How many people ranked this number 1, statement 1, number 1, and how many ranked statement 1, 7. And so this would be the least important, how many people ranked it the least important, and this is how many people ranked it the most important, and everywhere in between. And so as you can see, statement 1, statement 2, statement 3 was very high on the marks as far as it being the most important to our staff. Statement 4, statement 5, statement 6, and statement 7. And so we have a very mixed answers with a couple of high markers sticking out. But from that, whenever we aggregate everything together, this is the iteration we come up with. And so whenever we average, the most important to our staff was having a full 5-day Thanksgiving break. Second, third, and fourth choices were very, very close. An all work day between the 2 semesters held. And then the first day, whenever we return from winter break. Yes, excuse me. Parent-teacher conferences held only during school. Students are released, but teachers attend a single full-day parent conference each term. And then all PD being held the week before school starts, giving teachers and students a day off sometime in the school year. And so we made 3 calendars with these 4 marks in mind. We actually made 6 iterations of the calendar, and we brought it to our calendar committee. We had meaningful conversation about that, and we decided that we were going to bring 3 to the staff to vote on while we were a week before we left for Christmas break, and we left that open all through Christmas break. This was calendar vote option number 1. As you can see, there's 3 PD days at the beginning of the year, and 1 PD day built in throughout the year. This is a parent-teacher conference. PD day is combined. It is a half a day of PD, 8 to 11. And then the parent-teacher conference goes from noon to 6, followed by no school day the next day. January 3rd is a work day, and there is no April break and no May break. Calendar vote option number 2. 3 PD days at the beginning of the year, 1 PD day built in throughout the year. Parent-teacher conference days are full days of instruction, followed by a 4 to 7 parent conference twice during the week of parent-teacher conferences, both semesters, and then a no school day to follow. January 3rd is a work day, April 6th is the no school day, and May 16th is a PD day. Calendar vote option number 3. This is kind of hybrid of the previous 2. And so what this did was we still have the 3 PD days at the beginning of the year and the 1 PD day built in throughout the year. Parent-teacher conferences on Thursday, teachers work a full day with students, and then parent-teacher conferences are from 4 to 7. On Friday, it's that split day, and it would be from 8 to 11 would be the PD day, and then the conference time would be from noon to 3, followed by no school day on Monday. And then January 3rd is a work day, and there's no April break and no May break. So we put this out to our staff, and this is the response we received. We had the opportunity for staff to give feedback. A lot of people were very thankful about putting this out to a vote this year the way we did. This is, like I said, the first year we've done it like this. And our rule of thumb from the calendar committee is in order to not have a runoff, we wanted something with more than 45% staff voting. And so we had a calendar option number 1 had a 65.5% approval. And that seemed to be what our staff favored the most. This calendar, this option 1 that I showed you was developed on the option that was passed by the board last year before COVID hit. We had to go back and adjust the calendar based on the late start date, but this is the calendar pretty much verbatim we had prior to COVID. And so for you guys to get a look at the staff's preference and the recommendation to the superintendent, it is option 1, and it has those 3 PD days at the beginning of the year and the 1 PD day built half a day in October and half a day in February. A parent-teacher conference day on a Thursday in October the 21st from noon to 6. And then in February on the 10th from noon to 6 as well. And those are both followed by no school days the next day. A January 3rd work day, and a no April break and a no May break. And so that is the option that was chosen by our staff and what they recommended to the superintendent. And we will be making a recommendation at the next board meeting. Are there any questions?
Thank you. That was Very nice. I like the way you gathered all the information. That was very nice format. Thank you.
Question,
Yes, ma'am.
Madam President.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Smith, I love the policy, the way you presented, and you said before it's presented to the board, it was sent to the PPC and the LPPC, right?
Yes, ma'am. We have unanimous approval on both sides. Everybody voted for the option one because of the staff preference and the data we received.
Okay, I was just questioning, no trust, but I have to verify, and you said it, and thank you for an excellent report.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam President, I just wanted to also ditto everything that Ms. Williams said as well. Great presentation. If I were working, I would have selected calendar one myself. But I just have a question because I was surprised that after the LPPC made their presentation and they were so adamant about having a day in April. What was the feedback with that? Because they were like adamant that they had to have that day in April, that they chose calendar one, but it doesn't have it.
Yes, ma'am. So what we figured out, and this was on the back end of last year, was that day in April interferes with testing. And that has been communicated to our staff and our principals, our teachers, the calendar of the committee. There's mixed feelings. We talked about having a day in early April, but it was only like 2 weeks after spring break to not interfere with the testing window. And we need every one of those days we can get for our kiddos. We want all of them to succeed. We want to give them all the opportunity to do the makeup testing and everything. And so we need to be here every day during that window. And I believe the conversation is that it was just either too close to spring break or too close to the end of the year after you got outside of that window that we might as well just make that push on through.
Makes sense. Great job. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. It does show that you all, the LPDC, and everyone involved was proactive this year. The timing of this calendar, the data that was collected. I understand the LPDC from last year is not the same as this year, and it shows. The improvement is amazing. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions, comments? Well, back to Dr. Paluski, please.
So thank you, Madam President. First of all, Mr. Smith, great job. Two kind of things we're even thinking about for the following year is just considering bringing two calendar years out. So 22, 23, and then considering a 23, 24. And the reason for that is to potentially give parents the opportunity as they plan vacations in advance is something that we're going to consider. Certainly, if we approve a calendar, way in advance, we certainly have the opportunity to come back if we have to make an adjustment for the board approval. So something that we're thinking about for the next time we approve the calendar. The other thing that I think we need to consider that Mr. Smith and I were talking about is, and I think he's done a great job getting the LPPC, CPPC feedback. I think that's invaluable. But I also think we need to survey parents. I think parents should have the opportunity to weigh in, and let's hear from them as it relates. So just want to make sure we have our parent voice as well. So a couple things we're thinking about as we move forward for next year. So thank you with that, Ms. Temple. I just wanted to add before we close out, just a couple quick updates as it relates to COVID-19. Dr. McGee and I met with Ms. Alexander, Nurse Williams, Nurse Green on our numbers. They currently stand at 12 positive staff and 37 staff in quarantine. And this will be in tomorrow's weekly board report, but I wanted to share with the public as well. 21 positive student cases and 97 students in quarantine. So that has moved up slightly from when we put the community letter out on Monday. But right now we see, no disruption to school operations. There's not one school that is sticking out over another. So we will continue to monitor that daily as we always do. So wanted to give you and the community, our schools are doing great. Our, with social distancing, washing hands, wearing masks, all that we know from our health department, that all is remaining in place. So kudos to our administrators and our teachers and our students for abiding by that. The second thing I wanted to update everyone on is you probably heard the governor this week, as well as we've been receiving information as it relates to COVID-19 leave. And so one of the things, I was meeting with Mr. Brown today, Mr. Smith, you're going to see this in your weekly board report tomorrow. We're working on a resolution, as many school districts are right now. I believe we got about 1.7 million in CARES funding. So we are considering, it'll be my recommendation, to extend a little bit of that emergency leave. So just know that we're working behind the scenes to get that organized in a way that we can bring it to the board, and we'll give you a presentation about the funds. You also saw that the ESSER funds, hopefully there's another round of ESSER funding called ESSER Part 2 that we believe we're going to get as well. So as we get more information on that, we're going to share that with the board and the public, so you're very well aware of that. The last thing I want to make sure that we update the public on, and really our employees, is just a reminder. We've started this week working even more strategically with our health department on rolling out the vaccine for our employees. Probably heard the governor talk about where they are with 1A in the phase, and our educational employees are part of 1B. So we've already started that planning process. Spoke with Nurse Slaughter today at the health department, gave us some insight, and we're beginning that planning process. So I would just encourage our employees. That survey went out yesterday, I believe it was. It is voluntary. You do not have to complete the survey, but what we're trying to do is to determine the number of individuals within our employees by school who would like the vaccine, so we can start to kind of get an idea on the numbers and then how we're able to roll that out. Also, there's a frequently asked questions with the vaccine that the health department has provided to us. They want to make sure that we got out that to employees so they had proper information in order to make a decision. So we're going to continue to plan as we always do. And I appreciate our board support. I appreciate our community support as we try to keep everybody safe, but also trying to get that vaccine out to our employees as fast as possible.
Dr. Kalu, I'm sorry.
Yep.
You might ask a quick question?
No, sir. Go ahead.
So do you expect that to be provided to teachers, to anyone in a school building, to central office personnel? What do you may not be able to ready to answer that. I was just curious if you knew what your expectation was there.
Sure. And we're seeking to ask that same question actually to the health department. So some of the language is different. Some of the language I read is, school district employees. Other of that mentions, teachers, and it says staff. So we want to make sure certainly teachers on the front lines working with students, but we know we have maintenance workers as well that work in our schools and that can be in contact. So right now we're collecting all that information for all of our employees. I'm sure there's going to be a phase in with, teachers first, frontline, and then kind of phase it in. So that's a great question. As we get that information, that's why we want to do the planning process up front. Also, it's our understanding that really the health department, the state officials aren't really going to know until about January 15th, sometime next week, where they think we're going to begin that process. Right now, we think it's going to take around 60 days to actually vaccinate all of our employees. So, stay tuned. I know the health officials are getting those vaccines as well. Our nurses are a part of that, phase 1 process, our school psychs, those individuals. So we're in that process. So great question. Any other questions?
Dr. Paluski, I had a question as far as like the PPE. Yes, some children do come to school, but are there extra masks available at each school? Like if one breaks or if they lose one, they forget it at home, whatever.
Yes, great question, Ms. Person West. That's exactly right. So we do. Now, Mr. Williams has really been coordinating our effort on PPE. He could probably speak more to that, but I know that he keeps that, he's getting that inventory from each school. So if there is they need more, he is at the ready to mobilize that from where we have them stored, and then mobilizes that out to each individual school. So I would say if there's a school out there and they're running low, I know Mr. Williams is on top of it. So I have not had any, no concerns have come to my knowledge that a school is without PPE. We have enough PPE as needed.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Good question.
Anyone else? Okay, I just want to say, I heard some great ideas. There was great information, great presentations. Great job, guys. Thank you so much.
Great job. You two cappers down there, Dr. McGee and Dr. Barnes. Happy Founders Day.
Well, we thank the board support. Our team's been working very hard. I want to thank all of our executive team members for their leadership and the work that they're doing every day to keep the main thing, and that's support schools. That's why we're here. So I appreciate the board support of all of us.
Great job. Great job tonight.
Thank you all.
Fantastic. Who so moved that we close out?
Do we have to move since it's a workshop?
No motion necessary. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Mr. Staggers, give me a call, please.
Will do.